Very good. Well, welcome to you all. And we're going to go ahead and get started with session one. I'm Dr. Rick Fuller. Please call me Rick. This is in kind of your session one of two. And this we're going to talk about the intro to online learning, and I've really kind of titled this differently. Can I really teach that online? Because if you think about it, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what online is and what online isn't. And my goals this morning are to kind of give you some different perspectives on what and how you can structure and do some things. So just putting, as any good educator would, putting some general objectives together on how and what we're going to hopefully accomplish today. I want to go through and we're going to talk a lot about some different pedagogical opportunities. We're going to talk a lot about the different ways to teach, the asynchronous, the synchronous, and really I'm going to go through and talk about a term you may or may not have heard about, and that's blended learning. And that's in essence what we are in right now. We're pushed into a blended learning format. Most of you have been probably doing some level of this, but it really has ramped up here, given the lockdown, given the COVID, given the fact that we're all having to continue to try and move ourselves forward, but we're doing it remotely, we're doing it technologically, we're trying to keep everybody safe. But we're going to go through and I'm going to talk about 4 different types of online learning. Basically 4 different types of courses, if you would, and I would even put that as a caveat. It's not just courses, it's also different kind of lessons that you teach. We're going to compare and contrast the on-ground versus online pedagogical opportunities. We'll look at both synchronous and asynchronous online pedagogies given the different kind of course examples. And one of the things that I would like to do today is to actually have you take a lesson and transition that. In other words, take a look at just what you would do in just a small course or a small lesson that you would teach on any given day and list out the things that you do in your classroom. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how and what kind of online synchronous and asynchronous opportunities may be there. So we'll spend some time doing that. And like I said, we're going to spend some time talking about blended online pedagogies as part of any teaching and learning process, because in essence, that's what you're doing. You're looking to figure out how can I do certain things synchronously, asynchronously, face-to-face, however you're structuring and doing it. My goal for this seminar this morning is to make this as interactive as possible. So please feel free to jump in at any point in time and ask questions that you have. I want this to be interactive. The worst thing in the world is to sit through what I would call like any webinar. If you've ever sat through a webinar, they can be brutal because it's usually just a talking head, and sometimes you don't even see the head. You just hear the voice and some PowerPoints, and everybody's in groups like you are, and everybody kind of zones out and tunes out because it becomes like TV. And I really don't want that for this seminar. Any of the seminars I ever teach or any of the teaching I do, like you, I want interaction, and that becomes the key thing. So as you need or have any kind of a question, please feel free to unmute your mic and jump in at any point in time. No formalized requests or hand raising, just jump in and stop me at any point. So the question is, how many of you have taken an online course? Anybody in here taken an online course before? Okay. How many of you have taught an online course? Maybe yes, maybe no. How many of you had good experiences with that? With the online, some of you going yes, no. And let me ask you, those of you that have taken online courses, what were some of the good things about it and what were some of the bad things about it? If anybody wants to jump in and answer, please do. If somebody wants to sit on the mic to do that, please.
Anybody? Ellen? Ellen is speaking.
Go ahead.
The good things, I think, are that a lot of times it's asynchronous, and so there's a lot of convenience as to when you fulfill your assignments. And do you want bad things too, or just good things?
Sure, go ahead.
The bad thing is that the lack of, especially the ones where there's no online format like this. I think it's a little awkward trying to establish a classroom rapport, or even within your work group at first. It's awkward when you're just doing everything verbally at first, and sometimes that's all that the courses offer.
Yeah. I think you bring up a couple of very, very good points. First, One of the things that that online does, especially the asynchronous, is it gives us what we call learner control. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. Learner control is a good thing, and as an adult, that's one of the things that we're looking for, is that control of ourselves. Now, that we can control the pace and flow of the information, we can control when we use it, when we do it, all of those things. And I think that's a positive thing. Some of the negative things, though, can be, as you're talking about, structure and something that we call interaction. When we are in a face-to-face setting with students, we have interaction. We can develop rapport with students. And sometimes when instructors move things to an online platform, that gets lost, and it becomes more like reading stereo instructions. There's really no interaction. It's very, bullet pointish. It's do this, do this, do this. It becomes more like the old correspondence courses from back in the 60s and 70s. And that's not what this is. And one of the things that we know is good teaching is good teaching. Whether it's in the online, whether it's asynchronous, whether it's synchronous, we know good teaching is good teaching. So the whole concept of, what does online even mean? Those lines get blurred. They truly do, as far as, what is and what isn't. And sometimes we think that online is something different, that you're either face-to-face or you're online. And online is this thing over there that has nothing to do with anything that we have traditionally been doing. And I'm hopefully going to give you some different perspectives and give you some different ideas this morning, that maybe online isn't any different than teaching face-to-face. It's just thinking differently about it. It's just a different modality. In fact, in many respects, there are some opportunities that exist. There are some open opportunities that maybe there are some things, and you're going to hear me say this, and probably I'm head on slides, but there are certain things that are better taught face-to-face, obviously. And there are certain things that may be better taught online through synchronous or asynchronous. And we're going to discover those and take a look at some of those today. All right, so just to put some things into perspective, I've mentioned these three terms: face-to-face, synchronous, and asynchronous. Let's use some definitions so that we kind of understand what that means and what the difference is. It's not based upon any LMS like Blackboard or Google Classrooms or whatever platforms you're using, or Google Meets or Zoom or any of that. That doesn't matter. They're all the same thing. But the three different modalities, you've got face-to-face, which is basically student and teacher being in the same time and space. So in other words, you're sitting in the same classroom. Then you have synchronous, which is we're in the same time, but we're separated by space. It can be very close to face-to-face, but we're separated geographically. This is what we are doing right now. We're all in the same time, but we're in different spaces. We're basically in 4 different spaces, or 5 different spaces. I'm here sitting in my dining room. You're sitting in different classrooms across the area. The asynchronous is where we define things as being separated by time and space. So in other words, this is what you were talking about before, where you were learning asynchronously, where you just, you would read something, you would answer some questions, you would listen to a narrated PowerPoint possibly, or some other pedagogies, but you would do it at your own time and your own pace and your own space. That's asynchronous. Now, some may see distance education, which is basically what this is, as something less, the online. But as I said before, we know that good teaching is good teaching. It's just a matter of how you develop that rapport and how you create interaction with the student. For teachers, it really is it's just getting us to start thinking digitally and understand what works best for different students. Now, think about this. You're all in different grade levels. Where's the elementary teachers, the K through 4 or 5? What room are you guys in? Okay, down on my lower left screen. All right, how many of you are high school teachers? Okay, how many of you?
I divided that kind of by humanity.
That's fine.
They're divided by humanities, STEM, and like language and religion. So I
That's
did it by
perfect.
design.
That's fine.
Yeah.
No, that's
Yep.
fine. And then you've got those that are in the middle schools. And then you start looking at the different disciplines. You've got math teachers, English teachers, science teachers, phys ed teachers, music teachers. Think of all the different disciplines that are out there. We need to think digitally, but we need to think a lot more. What works in one discipline or one grade level may not work in another. So this is not a cookie cutter approach to teaching. Teaching is still teaching, and we need to know what works best for our students, for our subject matters, and for the content that we have. Okay? So those are things that we're looking at. So the whole idea of online pedagogy is, can all courses be taught online? What do you think? Can everything be taught online? What's your thoughts with that? Can they be or can't they be? How many think anything can be taught online? I'll take that as a no. Thumbs down.
I would say that it might be able to be taught online.
Yeah, actually, so the response in our room, Richard, is that everything probably can be taught online, but not maybe so well. There are some things that can't be well taught online.
And I kind of agree with that. And there are also, and I would also argue that there are some things that are probably better taught online than face-to-face. And we'll talk about some of those. I think there's some better options and opportunities for learning and processing. And I think you need to know, and you need to understand the different things. Examples, one of the things we're going to talk about are the different course types. And one of the course types is a skills type lesson or a skills course where you're teaching skills. Now, there are physical skills and there are mental skills. I think mental skills can be taught online and they can be structured quite well. Math skills that you're doing, certain other skills, they are very well translated or transitioned to an online asynchronous or synchronous format. But certain physical skills, not so much. Example, and I'll take this out of something from higher ed, but if I was going to be teaching a nursing program and I was teaching skills, medical skills, like how to take a blood pressure or how to start an IV or give an injection, yes, I can certainly show a video. I can certainly give you the steps and procedures on how to do that. But what can't I do? What can I do is I can't be there physically while you actually do the skill to make sure that you're doing it correctly. So that is something that is obviously better taught face-to-face. So you have to know and understand certain things. And this is where, within higher ed, within K through 12, there are schools that will have certain residency requirements because there are certain things that just absolutely have to be taught face-to-face. And other things can be taught online. Maybe they're better taught face-to-face. And then there are those things that I would argue are probably better taught in the online, whether it's synchronously or asynchronously. And as a teacher, those are the things that we need to know and understand. So one of the things that I heard was the level of rapport that is developed. We know from the literature that good teaching requires that an instructor develop rapport with their students. Now, I know this firsthand. I knew this from watching my son. I could tell every time, as my son was growing up and going through school, I could tell teachers he had a good rapport with, and I could tell teachers he had a very bad rapport with. The ones he had bad rapport with, he just did not learn and did not do well. But we know from the literature, this requires interaction. Now, interaction comes in basically 4 different formats. From the literature, excuse me, from the literature, we know that there's instructor to student interaction. In other words, that's how you interact with your students. There's student to contact interaction, which is where and how you structure online lessons so that students are able to interact and process and be introduced to that content. That's something we do very, very easily in a face-to-face class. But how do you do that in any kind of an online, utilizing some kind of an LMS, using learning management system or a course management system? You hear both terms. But how do you create that level of student interaction with the content? You want to get them into that information. And then you want to generate student-to-student type interactions, because we know that there's a lot of things that go on, and those are more the cooperative learning, the group work, those kind of things, because we know there's value in students learning from each other. Now, there's a 4th one, interaction, and that's student to technology. And this is what really kind of takes some center stage, Because we as teachers, when a student is having some kind of technological problem, we become the first line of defense. Now, many times we can just solve a very, very simple problem, but other times if there's a technological issue, that needs, maybe an IT person, maybe a help desk person, they need something else. Now, this creates a large burden because think about it, this creates a major barrier to the student being able to learn. If they can't connect to the technology appropriately, then they can't get to you, they can't get to other students, and they can't get to the content. So that becomes somewhat of an issue, and that's something that is a barrier that needs to be taken care of ahead of time. In K through 12, you have a higher threshold with this because you're dealing with how many different students that have a variety of different technologies, so you have to find the simplest form. I always talk about keeping it simple. Keep everything technologically as simple as possible. Now, I understand you're using Google Meets and Google Classroom, correct? These are very, very simple platforms.
That's correct.
That's correct. Okay. So you're using those platforms and they are very simple. I can tell you at Robert Morris, forgive me. At Robert Morris, we have done virtually the same thing. And we use Blackboard, and that's fine. And one of the things you'll hear me say later is an LMS is an LMS is an LMS. It really doesn't matter. But you keep it as simple as you possibly can. Keep the simplest formats of things. Google Meets is a very, very simple thing. They're going to upgrade. I don't know if you've heard this, but Google is planning to upgrade the platform a little bit so that you can interact more technologically and do some different things. You'll be able to do more whiteboard type stuff. They're going to have a whiteboard on here. Eventually, they're going to be doing some breakout rooms and some breakout groups. And I think there's a few other bells and whistles that they're adding in. I asked the question last night. I was on campus when that was going to happen. I was talking to our IT director, and he told me probably something. He says Google keeps saying soon. Nobody knows what that means, but I think there's some upgraded things that are going to happen within the Google Classrooms and within the Google Meets. So the technology is something that if it's not working, then that becomes a major barrier to the other types of interaction. So as you think about those interactions, however, make sure that in any lessons that you're doing, you keep these things in mind. The instructor to student, how are you making connection between you and your student? How are you assisting the student to make contact with the content? And how are you facilitating students to students interacting together through group work, which we know is of great value in cooperative learning? So let's talk a little bit about some of the different structures of distance education and online. Teaching online really involves using the internet. I mean, we used to have correspondence courses a year ago back in the 60s and 70s, but once the internet came on board, this became a tremendous way to interact with people over great distances. So it becomes a tremendous conduit for instruction, and there are things that we use within our classroom. This becomes part of the initial focus with blended learning. You have it from all the way down and looking at web supported versus a blended approach versus fully online and just anything in between here. Just how much you choose to use that is really dependent upon, I think, the best pedagogies, the best instructional strategies. But if you think about it, we're forced right now into moving more because of the COVID and the safety of all. We're into moving more toward the blended and moving more toward fully online aspects of things, depending upon where we are, what we're doing, and what the situation and circumstance is. Online is not about, however, forcing things into an LMS, but really understanding the nature of what can work in an online, what can be working very, very well asynchronously, and what can work synchronously. And that then helps us to know as teachers what best to use. Now, there are limitations in your choices of whether to use synchronous or asynchronous, and those are some variables that are outside of our control. This COVID has kind of forced many things to be done synchronously that maybe has moved many of us as educators out of our comfort zone. But that decision as to what to balance, because if you're doing synchronous sessions, in other words, that's real time, like we're doing right now where you're teaching with Google Meets, you can basically run your classroom the way that you normally do. You have some technology that you have to do, and you have some limitations over the face-to-face, but there are some workarounds that you can actually conduct and do. As I said before, there are things that are better taught online than face-to-face, and kind of vice versa. It's a matter of knowing. In fact, I would probably tell you it's not cookie cutter. There's one of the things that I don't believe in, and we'll talk a little bit more about this tomorrow. I don't believe in template approaches. I believe teaching is teaching, whether you're using technology or whether you're not. The teacher is in charge, and you know your students, you know your content, and therefore with your training, you know and understand the best pedagogies to use. By incorporating online through synchronous and asynchronous, this really does create another opportunity or another series of opportunities for some different ways that may help your students learn better. So while we're forced into this and we're trying to survive this, I think what this does is it really opens up a whole plethora of opportunities for us. The key element here is to know your students in any pre-K to 12 setting, whatever classroom, whatever discipline, and I would say everything in between, and know what they need. Understand your content, understand your students, understand your discipline, understand yourself, and then what becomes the best way to approach the learning. We do this traditionally in the face-to-face settings. Every day you sit down, you read your students, you look at your content, you look at the interaction, you look at the rapport, you look at all of these things, and then make the best plan of attack and put the best lesson plan together that's going to help your students meet those objectives that you have. We do this face-to-face. We can certainly do this in the online. It's just a different way of thinking and a different way of approaching some things. Online learning is another pedagogical opportunity that really exists. It really combines the face-to-face, it combines the synchronous, it combines the asynchronous, and may put teaching and learning in a little different light. I think this requires some education on our part as teachers, which is what you're doing today, but I think it also requires some education on your students' part. They need to learn how to learn online. They need to get into the same kind of a mode. It's not whether online is better than face-to-face, but what is best for the learning. So there are times now, yes, we're not allowed to do as much face-to-face right now because it's not safe, but we can find that blend between synchronous and asynchronous and how we can best still meet our students' needs through all of this. So let's talk a little bit about the blended learning approach, because in essence, that's what is going on right now. We're blending between potential. Are you guys going to be doing any face-to-face? In other words, are students going to be in school? Yes, they are. But there's a limited amount that they're going to be in. So you're going to do some levels of rotation. Sometimes they'll be in, sometimes they'll be synchronous, sometimes they'll be asynchronous. No. Tell me how you're planning to structure this.
Joe.
So Leslie stepped out of the room, but we are going to be in school 5 days a week and going to be meeting in person. But we will also, if people are sick or out of school, we will be allowing a live stream version of our classes.
And we want to be super prepared in the event that we get shut down to be able to make that transition in a moment.
So in essence, what you are doing is you are looking to find ways to incorporate not only face-to-face, but you're looking to figure out how to incorporate synchronous, how to incorporate asynchronous. And, you know, what you're going to probably find as you truly get into this is that there are some really interesting opportunities that you can do through Google Classrooms, which is your asynchronous. And there's some really interesting things that you can do through synchronous, through Google Meets, that augment very nicely what you're trying to do face-to-face. And if you get shut down to the point that you have to go to this, then you're set and ready to go. I think this choice of blending really becomes based upon the students, the content, the lesson objectives, and how you as individual instructors read that. That becomes a very vital part in my approach to this. Now, the terms that you're going to see within the literature, if you do any searching, You'll see blended learning. You'll see hybrid approach. You'll see mixed mode. You'll even heard, how many of you have heard the term flipped classroom? Yeah, that's a term that has been thrown around in education for a while. The flipped classroom is just basically the idea behind it is a little different than mixed or blended, but really not that much. Flipped classroom is just really the idea that, instead of having the lecture in class with you, they listen to a narrated PowerPoint or a video of you with the initial instruction outside of class, with the idea that they come back into class with you in front of them, and now they do their homework there or work with the material and process it. As opposed to the traditional, which is where we teach everything in class and then we give them assignments to go home and do, and they sit there and they get lost because they don't know what to do because they don't have you in front of them to now explain things a little further. There's some value in the flipped classroom, and this is in essence what this becomes. There's some pros and there's some cons. We can spend a whole couple of hours just talking about the flipped classroom concept and idea, but this is in essence part of that blended learning approach. Okay, again, you as the instructor and the teacher need to read what the students' needs are, what the needs of the content are, and what you know is the best way to help them to learn. So the question is, why blend? Goal of blended approach is really to join the best of both of face-to-face or synchronous at this point and asynchronous and find out what works here. There are some values, and I think, in one of the earlier discussions when I asked the question, the self-directed strength and learner control is on one side, and you have on the other side the clarity and real-time interaction that goes with synchronous or face-to-face. So there's a dichotomy there that you want to blend certain things. Online learning provides great learner control, and it's what we call in the literature, and it's more out of the adult learning aspect, is we want self-directed learners. Now think about this a second. You as adults, every one of you sitting in this session are self-directed. Yes, I know you were forced to be here. That's part of your job. This was a training that Leslie put together and, we're here. But think of all the learning that you have done and everything that you are attempting to learn throughout your career. Most of you have taken courses, gone back to school. You'll take seminars, you'll read things, you'll do whatever. That's self-directed learning. You're learning because you wish to grow within your profession. Now, you were forced into this to some degree because of an in-service, but your goal is to learn. And I will guarantee that of the group sitting here, no two of you are going to walk out of this session having learned the same thing. You're all going to take from it what you want. That's self-directed. One of the things that online learning does, as you were saying before, is it provides learner control. The face-to-face, however, or synchronous, provides a level of real-time clarity and interaction for students. So this blend becomes a very, very powerful tool. One of the best courses I ever taught, I was teaching an instructional design class, and I was teaching it to a combination of nurse educators and pre-service teachers. And there was a combination in the room. And what we structured and set it up to do is it was a graduate level course. It was for teachers that were coming back to as postbacks to get their teacher certification. And it was an instructional design class, curriculum, lesson planning, objectives, all of that kind of stuff. And it was what we called a hybrid form at the time. It was half online and it was half face-to-face. So every other week was an online lesson and the opposite week was a face-to-face meeting. And it was probably the most powerful way I have ever seen learning. The students loved it. They kept raving about the fact that they were learning so much because it was basically blending the self-directed and learner control, and they could control the pace and flow. And then every other week they got with me and they got the clarity of instruction. They were able to ask real-time questions, and it was a much deeper form of learning that the students reported when they walked out that they had learned a tremendous amount and were able to not only process the information, but internalize it in a very deep and meaningful way for them. So that's what we're looking for, and that's one of the things that we want. Face-to-face and synchronous time can be used to engage students in advanced interactive experiences. In other words, that's part of that flipped model, so that when we get them in front of us, whether it's synchronously, whether it's face-to-face. Now we can get them to work with this material and process it. And they then become active, engaged learners as opposed to just passive recipients of knowledge. And that's one of the things that we want to do, is find that balance, if we will. The online portion of any course can provide students what we call a multimedia rich content. In other words, you can do narrated PowerPoints. You can have them watch videos. You can have them interact and do certain things on the internet. And there's a whole bunch of stuff out there which you probably already know and incorporate, utilizing internet materials and tools and simulations and games and everything else that we incorporate in. You can still utilize those in any kind of an online, and it just provides a little bit more learner control. So increasing that learner control also increases the learners taking responsibility for their learning, and they may not realize that that's what they're doing. Because I think our overall goal, if I drilled down and asked you, and I've asked teachers this before, we really want students to become more self-directed, where they take more responsibility for their own learning. This is one of those things that can help. And I think that's one of the things that this is going to force people to do, is start to take responsibility for their learning, where they don't sit back and just put everything on you as the teachers and say, go ahead, I dare you to teach me something. Now they take responsibility for their learning, and they kind of delve into this in a little deeper way. In addition to the flexibility and convenience for students, research tells us there is early evidence that blended instruction can actually have greater outcomes. We see this because now the students have that learner control, but they also have the clarity of face-to-face with you. So the more we can get students to learn, the more successful we are as teachers. So the question is, how do we blend? Basically, there are no rules in place to prescribe what should be done. There's no one tool, one way, one format. It is literally blending face-to-face and online materials in such a way that the students interact with that content. We know and read the needs of our students. And I will tell you, it's the preferences of you as the instructor. It's what you feel comfortable with and what you know will help work with your students. And that's just something, as you start to learn these different options and opportunities, becomes a deeper way to have your students learn. There are those, however, who believe that all content should be presented online through an asynchronous LMS. Synchronous components should be used. Again, I'm not a big proponent that there's a one-size-fits-all. I've seen this through the literature. I've seen this in practice. I've seen this through a variety of different teachers who just simply say, no, it has to be asynchronous, or it has to be synchronous, or it has to be this. I don't think that there's one cookie cutter or template approach that works. I think you read it as instructors, and then we figure out what's best. Now, there are some empathetic considerations and things to think about. Creating high-quality blended instruction really can present some considerable challenges in the areas of production. It can become very labor-intensive initially, but here's one of the things I will tell you. Once you have produced certain things and developed online materials, they're there. And it's literally a matter of copying things over from one session to another or one section to another. I think the first time, it's like anything. The first time you teach something, you're developing lesson plans, you're developing materials, that's production. This is the same kind of thing that you're working with. I think you need to find the balance, and this goes to everything. The way an elementary or a K to 4 or 5 teacher will deal with things versus the way a middle school versus the way a high school teacher will deal with things is based upon student need. It's based upon content need. It's based upon how best to teach things. In fact, if you realize now, the way a high school teacher approaches students is much different than the way a K through 2, 3, 4 does. You have to know your students' needs, and that's part of what we have all done with our education. The idea, however, is this: online materials should enhance learning. Anything that you put up asynchronously should be there to enhance student learning. It's also based upon your objectives. Now, you're all working off a set of objectives and a set of curriculum, and your idea and your role is to interpret the best way to meet those learning objectives. You now have some different opportunities, and it's based upon your understanding of teaching with technology. because that's in essence what we're now all forced into, and this is going to open up a whole new world for you. Now, the idea of the LMS, there are those that say, well, we're working off of this, we're working off of that. It matters not. You'll notice I listed a whole bunch. There's Blackboard, there's Desire to Learn, there's Moodle, there's Canvas, there's eCollege, there's Google Classroom, there's Schoology. There's a whole bunch of these that are out there, and some of them have some really neat bells and whistles, and others of them are fairly basic. And I will tell you, it doesn't matter. It's the difference between, driving a Cadillac and driving a Chevy. What difference does it make? It all gets you to the same point. Okay. Google Classroom has some really neat tools to it. It has some interesting things. It's just a matter of thinking digitally and how you can do certain things. You can do just about anything you want in Google Classroom. It's just a matter of learning the software and structuring it. I'm going to ask this, and this will date me. Anybody in here remember, you all work off of word processing, Microsoft Word? Is everybody using Microsoft Word? Most people do. Anybody in here remember Word Perfect? I got, okay.
Yes.
Now I don't quite feel so old. I remember the Word Perfect. You remember the original Word Perfect with the blue screen and the silver letters, and you had this little tab at the top of your computer and you did all these pull down menus. I got really pretty good at that. And then when they upgraded and went to the next version, I went, no, I don't want that. I like this. I know everything. And it just was a different way of learning for me, and it was a different approach for me. And I didn't want it, but okay, I got forced into it. And the next thing I knew, I was like, okay, this version of Word Perfect, I think it was Word Perfect, the blue screen was Word Perfect 5.1. Then we moved to Word Perfect 6.0, which was the white background, and it was different. And then they came in and said, well, we're no longer going to use Word Perfect. We're going to use Microsoft Word. And I didn't like that either. So they kept forcing learn. And think about this. Every 3-4 years, they come out with a new version of Microsoft Word. And I'm not really sure they change anything. They just hide things better. There's a few new tools, but they just keep hiding it better. The bottom line is, it doesn't matter. Word processing is word processing. You still learn no matter what. You still type and you still do it. This is the same thing. The LMS does not matter. What does matter is the clarity of instruction and what you put in place. So let's talk a little bit about, and again, any questions, please. If there are questions, please, you don't even need to raise your hand. Just jump in and ask me any questions that you have. Let's talk about the 4 different types of lessons that are offered and things that we do. I think we have foundational courses or foundational lessons. This is any intro, and I would probably say that it's not necessarily courses per se, although I think there are probably more so within higher ed. We can kind of categorize some of our courses as intro. The Economics 101 course is probably a real foundational kind of a course. Any kind of an intro content that you have at the elementary, you have certain intro things, learning letters, learning numbers. These are all basics that help us to serve as foundational. In other words, the student can't add or subtract until they know the numbers and know the format of number and know the idea behind numbering. You can't subtract until you go through addition. So there's a sequence of things that we do that are foundational in nature. We also have skills-based classes, which I mentioned before, such things as mathematics. I think mathematics to some degree is skills-based. I think things like accounting, any technology-based classes, physical education, music, and anything else that you're teaching, any of the other subject areas that you're teaching. I think there are mental and physical skills. Think about everything that you teach that you could classify as a skill. What falls into mental? What falls into physical? These are things that help us to understand. There's also something called an analysis synthesis class. Now, this falls along the line of Bloom's taxonomy. And for those of you who don't want to hear more about Bloom's taxonomy, that you were tired of it when you went through college, sorry. But the analysis synthesis is the higher order thinking. It's where we take concepts of what we're doing and now begin to apply them. We analyze. When you analyze something, you're breaking it down into its parts. Synthesis is taking those parts and building something anew with it. And that's in essence what we're looking to do, is to have people analyze things and synthesize them and figure out how to do it. Some people will call this discussion-based course because maybe there's not a right or wrong answer for things. Example I'll give you at the college level, I used to teach a class years ago on healthcare. And it was leadership and healthcare informatics, things of that nature. And we used to do some level of debate over the difference between the US healthcare system and the Canadian healthcare system, which was best. Well, I'm not sure that there's a right or wrong answer to that. It's more of an opinion. It's more of people vetting out all ends of things. What any one of us in this room think is irrelevant. It's more of what we can support with facts and how we analyze and break down, well, the Canadian system does this, the US healthcare system does this. If we applied this, this would be it. So it's really kind of exploration and synthesizing into our own ideas and our own areas of things and justifying them. I think within K through 12 setting, examples of those would be history classes. Yes, I think a lot of the history is also foundational understanding, but I think there's lessons in history that you sit and you analyze them and you synthesize them in today's terms. Social studies does a lot of that. I think literature does that as well. When you break things down and you read different stories, you are analyzing that story and then breaking down the meaning of that story. Now, what one story means to one person may mean something different to another. So those are different things to think about. And I think there are also hybrid type courses, which are just a combination, or hybrid lessons is just a combination of the different types of pedagogies. So what's the value of understanding these? The value is they help us to know our objectives and to begin to think how best, if we can break the course down, and this really does fall down along the lines of Bloom's taxonomy and higher order thinking. If we can really break things down as to what the course is or what the lesson type is, it can help us to understand the different online synchronous or asynchronous pedagogies that we can employ. Let's take a look at foundational courses. They provide the foundation or knowledge that will be used to basically build upon in other courses. They're very basic in nature. They're designed to reinforce memorization of some basic concepts that will be applied later. Now, they're difficult courses in some respects to teach because students don't necessarily see where they're going to apply. Think about this. When you're learning things and you don't see how and where they're going to apply, then learning becomes very difficult. You have a difficult time understanding, how am I going to internalize that, or why am I going to learn this? Why is this even of value to me? They're designed to basically reinforce memorization of basic concepts that will probably be applied later. And that becomes the challenge, is to show students or teach students where and how they're going to use those skills. I'll give you an example. Science students may not understand all the reasons for memorizing muscles and bones. Necessarily, why am I learning this? Where am I going to apply this? Well, maybe we're not going to show them, but if they're going to use this later. This is done within nursing programs or within any kind of allied health profession, where a student is memorizing these terms, the muscles, the bones, the nerves. Why do I need this? Well, you'll be applying it later. Okay. Math student, understanding, learning such things as order of operations. Why do I have to remember and memorize order of operations? Well, because everything that follows builds upon that. If we don't get this, everything else doesn't work. So that becomes a foundational set of knowledge and skills. And the key element for us as teachers is to teach them where and how they're going to utilize that. And that becomes the challenge. So I want you to think about this. Think of all the courses and lessons that you teach, whether you're in K through 4 or 5, whether you're in middle school, whether you're in high school. Think of the courses that you teach in your area or the courses in your department, which would be classified as foundational and why. So if you want to, take a couple of minutes and just talk about within your areas, because you're all divided up into different groups. Take a minute or two and interact with each other and just decide what kind of lessons. Give me an example and share a lesson that you would consider to be foundational. So take a minute. We'll do a little bit of think, pair, share. So everybody right now, write down a lesson that you think could be foundational. So everybody got one in their head, whether you've written it down or not? What I'd ask you to do now is within the group, if you would take let's take a minute or two and just share some of the different courses in your area that you would think are foundational, or some of the different lessons that you think are foundational. I know you all thought this was going to be a talking head for the next 2 hours, as you could relax. Go ahead. Were you stretching? Mr. Duchamp's class or classroom, that's how it's listed on mine. Okay. What kind of foundational lessons did you all see? What kind of foundational lessons do you have?
Okay, so we saw grammar courses, so like words of the sentence if you're teaching English, punctuation, vocabulary if you're in like a language, field of study, all of first grade.
All of first grade.
Okay, your protege, Ryan Gracie, says that classification of like life
Or even
in,
measuring in science. Like
yeah,
learning
or
science
measurement
is
in science, that those are foundational.
I would agree with that.
important.
I could also maybe argue some of those are skills based as well. Do you think grammar is skills? Do you think there's skill involved in grammar?
Well, he said grammar.
Well, vocabulary in science is important. That was kind of what I worked on it. So like
Yeah,
science,
okay.
technical vocabulary, things like that.
I would agree with that. What else do you see? What else in any of the other areas did you find is foundational?
A lot of math skills for sure.
Yeah, I think some of the math skills, I think things like order of operations, things of that nature, or, I think a lot of things that you're teaching are foundational in nature because they're used. If they don't learn A, they can't do B or C. This becomes paramount and almost becomes a sense of urgency because the students, and we know this, the students that don't get the foundations, especially in some of the early grades, if they don't get those foundations, you know that they're always going to be playing catch up. So these become paramount, become very, very important. All right, let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about the skills-based. The skills-based require that students leave with a particular skill set. Okay, very, very simply, math, keyboarding, chemistry. I think writing is a skill. I think physical education, music, any of those. These are now very heavy skills-based type things. So how do you teach them? Well, a lot of times we are, and again, you could say, well, these seem like foundation. Maybe they are. So there's a combination there of foundation and skills-based type lessons or objectives, if you would. And a lot of times within any of these, we do a lot of drill and practice. I remember in the days where I was learning multiplication tables and remember memorizing those, a lot of drill and practice. Sometimes it is just that. It's rote learning. It is going over and over certain things so that they become secondary nature to us. There's a lot of other pedagogy. So what do? What kind of things can we do? Think of the things that you do in any kind of a face-to-face class as far as pedagogically goes. So again, think of all the courses and lessons that you teach in your department. Which would you classify as skills and why? Think of all of the lessons that you teach, and I would probably argue in every discipline there are skills. What skills do you have? Just share some. We can just go around the room quickly and do that. What skills do you have?
Like your, the Jackson, it's the doubles, baby. Sure. Like, yeah, that's like drilling. No,
Are we sharing, Richard?
Please, and you call me Rick.
Rick?
Thank you. Yeah, you can just do this quickly.
You said reducing fractions and writing argument was another one. What else?
Virtual, your room is very quiet over there. You want to join the conversation?
We're unmuted.
Because we're unmuted.
There is no greater challenge than teaching teachers.
Agree. I do agree.
What other kind of skills? Out of Mr. Burchell's classroom or Mr. Burchell's area, what kind of skills do you guys teach?
Go ahead, Michelle. Reading? I think you're, reading?
Yep. Okay, let's move over to Mr. Salinas's group. Anything out of Mr. Salinas's group?
There we go.
There we go.
Hey, Rick. Hi, Rick.
Hello.
No, we were talking like in geography, like when I teach geography class, so obviously a lot of it's foundational, but like also the kids are learning a skill of making maps. From atlas to their own maps and making that transition, which is always fun to watch.
No, I would absolutely agree. That is a skill. Reading a map, understanding how to read maps, longitude, latitude, all of that, plus the keys and knowing what that means, distance, that is a skill. Absolutely is a skill. Okay. All right. So I think you've got some good examples. You got some good understanding of what the different skills are. And you can go far more in depth than that. And we're not going to do that within the time we have, but I just want you to understand what that is. Analysis synthesis classes. These are courses, some might call them a little higher order learning. They base upon a lot of foundational knowledge or skill that's already been there. These are courses where core information is presented, but there may not necessarily be a right or wrong answer. You're looking for students to break things down and then to synthesize or to apply them in their own venue. This becomes some of the higher order learning along Bloom's taxonomy. Let me just give you an example, a literature class. Maybe in a literature class, and it depends, you could do this at any level, I guess, and you could have any, but I just pulled this out as an example. Maybe you teach them or have them read Aesop's fable, The Tortoise and the Hare. The Tortoise and the Hare, this is a classic fable that tells the story of a very slow tortoise and a speedy hare. The tortoise challenges the hare to a race. The hare laughs at the idea that the tortoise could run faster than him, but when the two actually race, the results are surprising. Okay, we know this. Okay, we know this. The question is that you may ask your students, you may have them read it, you may do all kinds of things to break this down so that they can analyze what goes on in here. And then you may ask the question, okay, what does this mean? Have you heard the old English expression, slow and steady? There's a number of questions and things that you want to direct the student to understand and to get from this. So you're having them analyze this with the idea that they synthesize the meaning on their own and maybe apply it in their own life and in their own venue. So there may not necessarily be, and maybe there's things that you want them to get that you guide and steer them to, and you want them to look at all aspects, but there may not be a necessarily right or wrong answer about what they're going to gain from this. Students may surprise you. They may get different things. So that becomes the key of what you're looking for in an analysis synthesis, is just a little higher order thinking and knowledge with that. There may be many opinions. The key element within this course is to flesh all angles out. So some of the assignments that you may give in an analysis synthesis is choose a topic, interview someone, write and discuss their findings leading to a discussion. Maybe that's something in a discussion board. Now, Google Classrooms does not have what they term as discussion boards, but they do have a question forum, which is basically the exact same thing as any discussion board. So you can set those up where a student can do things and write them this way. Write and discuss their findings, leading a discussion board or a paper or possibly a report that could be done through a synchronous presentation or could be done through an asynchronous. Now, I want you to think about something for a second. How many of you have classroom discussions? Sorry, people are dinging me. Ryan, Dr. Bernadowski is texting me. You must be texting her that you're in the session today. She just texted me that you're in my session. Okay, I want you to think about the classroom discussions that you have. Every one of you have classroom discussions. Do you not? Do you not ask questions to your class about something, whatever the topic happens to be? How do those discussions generally go?
Talking live or online?
Yeah. Are you talking online or in the classroom?
Just in the classroom for right now. In other words, when you have a group of, 15, 20, 25 students sitting in your classroom and you throw out a discussion prompt about, what's the meaning of Aesop's fable, what happens?
They say I'm in the wrong class.
Seriously, in any discussion that you have, such as this one that we're trying to do, what happens? What does everybody do? When you throw out a group question, what does everybody do?
It's correct. It's kind of like the 80-20 rule. Where 20% of the kids will dominate 80% of the conversation. That's
Yep.
pretty much a standard thing in that reality. The teacher's job in situations is try to get all the other kids involved as much as humanly possible in the discussion. That's it. But in that sense, sometimes kids are more willing to write in the anonymous sort of forum of a question, a Google question, or online discussion thing than they might be in class. But ideally, I think the human interaction of a class is, in a certain sense, superior to the discussion based online, even though the kids might make some really good points there.
Yeah, I think there's pros and cons to both, and I'm not saying that one is better over the other. I just think sometimes they're different. What I generally find in any classes that I teach is when you throw out a discussion prompt, you're absolutely correct. There's probably about 20% of the people in the class that are going to try and dominate the conversation. When you throw out a discussion, most people will look down at their paper and start writing something, pretending that they're busy, which means the instructor won't call on me and I don't have to answer anything. And when somebody else starts to talk or the instructor calls on somebody else, the rest of the room goes, thank goodness it wasn't me. And they just kind of zone out and tune out. And so the dialogue is basically, our goal is to have everybody in the room dialogue. But generally what happens is you have a very small group of people that, as you said, dominate the conversation. And usually the response that they come up with is rather superficial. It's not based upon the readings. It's not based upon the content. It's based upon something that just kind of flows off the top of their head. And the people who respond are generally the people who just think quickly off the top of their head. So, maybe the overall goal and the overall conversation isn't of as great a value. What you may find, I'm not saying in every situation, but you may find in some situations that an online discussion forum now generates greater interaction and requires everybody. Because if you think about it, the people, when you post online, they can't hide. In a classroom, they can hide. They can put their head down. They can not participate. They can pretend they're doing something else. They can zone out, but they can't be anonymous in an online discussion forum or question. Everybody now has to respond, and they know everybody else is going to read it, so they're going to think and do a little research and go back to the content so that they now are processing the information and they really write and put down a cogent thought. So those are things that you want to do. Now, this is all dependent upon the grade level, the subject area, and the subject levels of what you're doing. Elementary school, elementary classes may have less. K through 4, You have a different focus on what it is that you're looking to design for discussions or how you're looking to analyze and synthesize. So your goal may not be as open and free flowing as possibly high school students would be. So you have to, again, structure this to meet your students' needs and what it is. So think about what your goal is within any discussion or of an analysis synthesis type course, what your goal is in a face-to-face and what you would do in structure in an online, if that be the case. There's other things that you can do, like search and report techniques, have students research a topic and then use that as a catalyst for discussion boards or for papers. In other words, they can go out and research something and then come back in and report that through a discussion board. This is something that can be done very easily through an asynchronous platform. So again, I want you to think of all the lessons that you teach in your particular areas. Which would you classify as analysis synthesis? Which would fall into that category? Some of your classes just are naturally more involved in that. Others may be less so. But think about the different lessons. Where is it that you are providing analysis synthesis? Take a minute and just think that. And if you want to discuss that very quickly in your groups, we can do that.
We actually did this in the spring for a novel we were reading. And it was, I agree with him, but his had much more thoughtful responses. Because they had to write the response, type the response, and then they had to comment on someone else's response. Yeah, that's so, it was very effective. I like the commenting on other responses. Yes, that's good too, at another level.
Okay, anybody want to share any quick ideas of analysis synthesis?
So we said discussion of literature and history were two major ones.
Yeah, I agree with that. The discussion of different literature and what stories may or may not mean. I think history lends itself quite nicely to analysis synthesis, as do many of the other social science courses that are out there. I think they just lean to more discussion, more analysis of what happened. Was it a good thing that was done? Was it a bad thing? Just a lot of different directions with that. I'm interested to hear within the, go ahead, somebody was going to say something.
I was going to say that the STEM crew doesn't have as many open-ended, not the right answers. So there is some analysis and some synthesis, but it should, if taught well, lead to most of it leads to the same place, as opposed to a whole lot of variety.
I agree with the STEM. I agree within STEM, you're teaching hard sciences, you're teaching things that are right and wrong. But I think where the analysis synthesis comes into in STEM is the idea of application. And I think that's one of the things that you look at, one of the things that in the literature talks about not only STEM, but how we incorporate STEAM. You know, the idea of bringing the arts into the sciences with the idea of where we start to begin to see application of concepts. And that's where the creativity comes in place and where we can now start to see different things. And these kind of things can be facilitated where everybody starts to interact in more of an online format where you can kind of flesh out some of these ideas maybe. But the key element is you have to ask the questions and you have to put them in there. And I think sometimes the online may provide a greater opportunity for students to interact than does the traditional just face-to-face where, you know, the other thing I'll tell you is face-to-face discussions, which are part of the analysis synthesis, they take up a great deal of time, which is why we as instructors kind of move things along a little bit because we are always hamstringed by time. In the online, you know, when you are doing things through an online discussion, now there is greater time. Now, I will put this as a caveat. We're going to talk a little bit more about this tomorrow, and I don't want to get too deep into this. But this depends upon your group and what you're looking to accomplish with them. Sometimes your discussions or your discussion questions or what I call discussion boards are going to be far more involved. Depends upon the subject, depends upon the grade level, depends upon what your overall goal is and what you fit into the analysis synthesis and what your objectives are. But this can also take up far more time. And we'll talk a little bit more about some tricks of the trade tomorrow that may help lessen some of your time with this. But in a classroom, you may be only willing to take 5 minutes for a discussion or for an analysis synthesis where students begin to apply just simply because you don't have the time. In the online, through an asynchronous format, maybe you have an expanded period of time. Now, what that does for you, though, as teacher, is it really explodes the amount of time that you're spending, and now it becomes more one-on-one instruction. When I teach classes through undergraduate, graduate, and doctoral, we do a fair number of discussion boards on different things. And I can guarantee that when I sit and do a discussion board for a class that I'm doing, I may be sitting at my computer on a Saturday morning from 8 in the morning till maybe 11, 12, just because I am doing more one-on-one text-based interaction with them. Now, it's a good thing for the students, but it's just a lot more time for me. So there's some production with that. So you kind of, and I'll show you some tricks tomorrow if we get to that. All right, the hybrid courses, just to move on, hybrid courses, and I think this is probably more of the courses that we have. They're more a combination of those three types. Everything that you have probably fits into a hybrid that you can look at certain aspects of your course, certain aspects of a daily lesson plan and say, well, this is analysis synthesis, this is foundational, this is skills-based. And I think that just becomes an element. In order to understand how best to move some things to the online, I think it's of great value to know the different types of courses that you have. So I want to take some time and do an exercise if we can. And I want to start to move into some transitional kind of pedagogies and get you thinking about that. I want you to think of a course that you traditionally have taught in the face-to-face arena. Okay, something that's one of your favorites to teach, because we all have different lessons and different things that we really look forward to. The one you really look forward to teaching every year, kind of. Choose one weekly lesson that you teach in that course. In fact, I'm just going to ask you to think of your favorite lesson that you like to teach. In other words, there's one lesson, there's several lessons that I just look forward to. I know I'm teaching this particular course and I look forward to a kind of a lesson. I want you to think about your favorite lessons to teach. While you're doing that, I also want you to think about all the different pedagogies that you use. The lectures, the discussion, the handouts, the stories you read, the videos that you have them watch, the handouts that you have them do, the homework assignments, any papers, anything that you have them do. I want you to think about all those. I want you to also think about those lessons and which parts in there do you think are foundational, which are skills, which are analysis synthesis, or is the lesson just generally a whole hybrid approach anyway? All right, what I'm going to ask you to do is this. Think about it. You've already done it. Just for the interest of time, I'm not going to have you break up and do this in groups, but think about the lessons that you teach and describe. Why is it your favorite? What do you teach? What kind of activities and pedagogies do you use? What assignments? All those things, okay? So just think about those. We may share those here in a minute, but let's just do this. What I'm going to ask you to do, did everybody get a copy of this? Leslie, did you get this in my email? Obviously you did. Does everybody have this?
Yes, it's the last page of their handout.
Okay. What I'm going to ask you to do is this. Those lessons that you have done, I want you to take this handout and I want you to do what I'm doing here. And I've got two examples that I'll show you very quickly. This would just be an example of potentially a history lesson. And forgive me, those of you that are history teachers, I apologize. I am not a history teacher, but I put together just a quick listing. I'm not asking you to write out a lesson plan, but I want you to think about one lesson that you do. It could be a 45-minute lesson. It could be over a couple of days. It could be over whatever period of time you want it to be. It could be, a 15-minute lesson. It could be a 2-hour lesson. Doesn't really matter at this point. What I want you to do along the left-hand side is do what I've done here. I want you to list the traditional face-to-face class that you teach and everything that you do within this class. So for this lesson, I would do an intro and a welcome. Hello, welcome. I'm Rick Fuller, blah, 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 or I'm Mr. Fuller, whatever that happens to be. And I usually do some warm-ups in my classes. I usually do a series of opening questions on things, or I will put up puzzles that just kind of get their brains moving a little bit and do some different things with that. I may have chapter readings that I've asked them to do prior to coming into class, or maybe I want to use that in the class. I can do a presentation PowerPoint of the 3-day battle, and this is just an example of a history lesson within the Civil War, maybe the Battle of Gettysburg, and maybe I'm doing it as an intro. So I do a PowerPoint of the 3-day battle with a description of the battle and the leaders. Maybe I have a video that I wish to utilize on the Gettysburg, and there's a number of them out there. I may wish to do a class discussion question. Why was the Battle of Gettysburg significant to the Civil War? Maybe those are things that I want to know. And maybe I have them do some group work where I have them break out into groups of 4 to develop a report on one of the generals of the Battle of Gettysburg and provide a group presentation. And then maybe I have some type of an exam that I provide for them. Obviously this is going to be not just in a 45-minute period of time. Maybe this is over the course of 2, 3, 4 days. Maybe it's longer. That's just one example. Another example might be a more traditional K-4 type of a lesson, or maybe I do an intro to numbers lesson. I'm not sure where this would fall within your curriculum in a K through 2, 3, 4. I don't know, but you might do this in the first grade. You might do this in kindergarten. It's just an example. So I just have all the students to come together as a group. I motivate the students by saying something like, today we will be learning about numbers. Raise your hand if you know a number. So maybe this is a kindergarten class. Randomly select students to share the number they know. What this may do is, from some of the literature, has said that this taps into their prior knowledge. You have them write down the numbers that are shared on the board. Say, I will share with you a poem by Mother Goose that uses all the numbers from 1 to 10. You read the poem, 1, 2, buckle my shoe, and then you have the students recite the poem after you. Okay, so that may be just as something that you do within a 10, 15-minute period of time in a classroom. This is what I want you to do. I want you to take that one lesson that you like, however simple it is, however complex it is, and along the left-hand side, I want you to list out all of the traditional type of pedagogies that you use. Just break them down, no different than what I've done in these 2 examples. Okay, give everybody a couple of minutes to do so. Give everybody a couple of minutes to do this, and then we'll kind of talk about some different options here. Okay, looks like some folks are getting there. Do you know how many of you need another minute or so?
We're good.
We're good? Okay. So let's move on. Let's take a look at some things. All right. Let me open this up. One of the things that I sent forward was this document. It's about 4 pages long, and it has a whole bunch of different pedagogies in here. Along the left-hand side, similarly, this is what I call transitional pedagogies. In other words, what you do in a traditional face-to-face setting and what you can move to web-based pedagogical design. This is key, and this is helpful and hopefully understanding. This is not all-encompassing, but gives you hopefully some things to think about. My apology about the size of the font. I do apologize for that. It got smaller only because I didn't want it to be 15 pages long. Let's take a look at some different things, and these are in no particular order, but, and I'll make this as large as I can on the screen so that you can see this. Is everybody able to see what I'm posting up here? Got it, thank you. Okay, so we've got possibly, and this was all again, grade driven. You know, certain things that are listed here you can do, other things that you may not be able to do, but there's some different ideas and some different things to get you. Case studies. Case studies are usually structured as text-based or video narratives in the online. How many of you utilize case studies? Anybody ever utilize a case study of some sort in your classes? I think sometimes the history classes will use cases of sorts. In several of the classes I teach, we use cases. They're just different examples of things that can be done. A lot of times this can be set up as a text-based where the students read the case, or it can be some kind of a video. And a lot of what you can do in transitioning things to an online can be done through creating a video. And think about it. How many of you carry cell phones with you? The cell phones that we carry today are fairly sophisticated cameras. We can make videos very, very simply, very easily of us demonstrating and doing things. Whether you realize it or not, you can actually make videos of yourself very easily with Google Meets by utilizing the camera on your computer and the voice. You can and you can set up a recording, and you can actually stand in front of the class and teach and create a video of yourself. It becomes a very, very easy thing to do, and that is something that can be done for just any of the pedagogies that you want to transition to an asynchronous format. You can do video narratives with a format for students to explore the scenarios. The interaction may be teams. You could do synchronous sessions. You could do asynchronous sessions. You could do this discussion. You can set up a variety of different things specifically through Google Classroom. Anybody in here ever do a debate in your class where you have students debate one side of an issue versus the other side? A couple of you have done that. Those are the kind of things that you can also do in an online asynchronous format through an LMS, through a learning management system like Google Classrooms. You can structure and set up a series of questions or a series of assignments where you have students argue one side of an argument or the counterpoint. And you can do this through a series of Q&A, and you can do it through a variety of interactions. You can do this synchronously through a Google Meets, or you could do it asynchronously through a Google Classrooms. You know, any of those kind of things work. And I've done the online debate, and I've done it with college students. I've done it with graduate. It has been an extremely powerful way to learn. And what I've done is force students to look at different things. I put them into teams and done it as a cooperative learning. And it was something that was done over the course of a couple of weeks where they prepared for it. And then we did it through an asynchronous discussion board. Demonstrations. How many of you do demonstrations in your classroom? I would tend to think that the majority of science teachers do some kind of a demonstration. What we were talking about before within geography, with the idea that you are teaching students how to read maps and doing things, you're doing demonstration. You're demonstrating something, you know, within the sciences, within the math teachers, I would tend to think do a fair amount of demonstration. Order of operations, we're going to structure this. Here's how you solve this equation. Here's how you do this. And then you send home examples problems for students to do. That is a demonstration in essence. Demonstrations can be done asynchronously through one of two ways. You can do it through a video where you're standing in front of the room using Google Meets, video record yourself, and then post that on your Google Classroom. That is one way to do it. Another way might be through a narrated PowerPoint. You can post these sometimes, and it depends upon the bandwidth that you're using. You can post these up on YouTube. If you have a Google account, you're using Google email, you can very easily convert those to YouTube videos, and now they no longer take up bandwidth or take up space on your shelves. Provide the link. It's an easy thing. The students then have access to you, seeing you demonstrate and teach something. You can do direct instruction. First of all, what is direct instruction? Some people call it direct teaching, direct instruction, the same thing. Direct instruction, by definition, and think back to your instructional days, direct instruction is where the teacher stands up, demonstrates something, breaks it down into a series of steps, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different steps that students have to go through and do something. And then the instructor demonstrates that. The instructor then breaks those steps down. The instructor has the students do it, and the instructor has the students practice it. That is a lot of what we do. We do direct instruction. So can that be done online? Yes, you can do that with a high degree of rigor. You can structure a number of different things. This can be accomplished in the online by posting some kind of a text-based set of instructions. You could do a video demonstration showing how to do this. You can have the students practice, and some of the skills and some of the things that you would have them do, they can demonstrate to you either synchronously or asynchronously through some kind of a posted assignment. You're going to have them do worksheets. You're going to have them do different things, and you can show and have them see what you're doing with that. And then you can have an extended practice, which is what we do within the direct instruction, where you allow them to, provide something. And again, it just becomes an assignment that they do on their own and then submit to you. Discussion boards. We talked a little bit about that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but discussions can be synchronous. They can be asynchronous. I mean, you can use things like Google Meets where you can have discussions. Tomorrow, we're going to spend some time talking about the synchronous classroom and how you generate interaction there, because you see that in this, it is not the same kind of interaction that you have in a face-to-face. In a face-to-face, things are very quick. But in the synchronous session like this, you notice that there's a delay. When I ask questions, there's a delay in who's going to respond and what's going to happen, because everybody just doesn't want to jump in. So you have to allow that wait time, if you would. And it becomes more accentuated than we do in the face-to-face. You can do asynchronous discussion forums, which can be very, very effective, can reflect, have the students do a lot more critical thinking. These can be ongoing discussions. These can be shortened. You can do a number of different things. And in fact, I would tell you the questions section in Google Classrooms will allow you a fair amount of latitude to what it is that you wish to accomplish. But again, this goes back to what you want to accomplish in any kind of face-to-face discussion. What your goal is there, now you transition that to the same thing. The only difference is it does take a lot more time as far as what you're doing. We will talk a little bit more about formative and summative evaluation, but there's some different things here. This is one of the things I forget who it was, Mr. Birchall, I think you were talking about this the other day when we spoke, that you wanted to have a little bit more information about formative and summative assessment. We'll talk a little bit more about those toward the end of the session today, or we'll start tomorrow with it, depending on how far we get. There is a question about group exercises in online. Can you do group work? How many of you utilize group work in your classes? For a variety of different things. What is the value in your mind of group work? Please go ahead.
Is our sound on?
Yes,
Can you hear me?
I can.
For me, it's science, and I think sometimes when I'm teaching skill, for instance, There's maybe some students who aren't strong. It's helpful to work through it as a table, let's say, before having to present to the class what the solution is. So I'll use it a lot of times for that kind of thing. In addition to labs, obviously labs, but also for some of the conceptual stuff, I do it.
Right. In other words, it helps them. The students are in essence learning from each other, correct? And it's a way to balance things out. It's a way to not just have them interacting with you, but interacting with others. I'm of a big belief, and I see this more in higher education, that students learn as much from each other as they will from the instructor and from the content and the materials, and I think there is great value. I think the older you get, I think there is greater value in that because of the knowledge that certain students have and their ability to teach. You know, we could spend a whole couple of hours talking about cooperative learning, but I think there are some great values in doing group exercises. And those of you who do them in your classes, whether it's at, you know, the K through 4, the middle school or the high school, these can still be done online. It just takes a little bit more planning. It takes a little bit more time in some cases, but students will interact. I will share something with you. I teach a leadership class in higher ed, and I had them do a group presentation. In other words, I divided the class up, and these are all adults, but I divided the class up into groups of 4. And this was an online class, so they were separated. This was all asynchronous. They were separated by time and distance. But I established these groups online, and I had students in Seattle, I had students in New Mexico, I had students in New Jersey, I had a lot of people in Pittsburgh, but I had them all over the place. And I divided them up, and what I had them do was to, as a group, explore one aspect of leadership and do what basically amounted to about a 30-minute presentation. And these folks were at a distance, and what they did is I gave them access to some group pages we use Blackboard, and I gave them access to group interaction. A lot of it was done through email. They got together and did Google Hangouts, Google Meet sessions. At the time, we were using something called Blackboard Collaborate, but it was just, it's another tool. And they were interacting with each other and doing planning, and then everybody went out and did their separate thing, and then they put it all together, and they recorded a narrated PowerPoint that was posted in a discussion board, and everybody else was able to see it and view it, and now we had discussions. And I initially, when I did it, wasn't sure it was going to come together, but it did. When you put the students and tell them and set the expectations, now they were able to go out and do this, and it became a very, very powerful way to interact and to learn from each other and to produce something in a cooperative learning fashion. So it did work, and it did function. You can do guest speakers. There's no reason in an online not to have a guest speaker. You've got me in here today as a guest speaker coming in to talk to you through a synchronous format. You can also do this asynchronously, where you bring somebody in who does a narrated PowerPoint. In some of the classes I've had instructors do a narrated PowerPoint for me and just come in, and I'll have a posting of a narrated presentation or video. Any of those kind of things can be done. You know, I do something with reflective journals, and some of the LMSs will have students do Anybody in here utilize the reflective journal in any of your, or something similar to that? Nobody? I've utilized reflective journaling with some of my classes, and it's a very, very powerful way to learn. Because you're reflecting on what you're learning, you're reflecting on the lessons, and some subjects lend themselves better to that than others. But this is something that can also be done online quite nicely. I mean, there are journal options within classrooms and some other things that you can have students do, or you can simply have them send you journals individually. If you don't want that shared within the group, they can email that to you, they can post it so only you can see it. The lectures we've kind of talked about, those are some different things. There's a whole bunch of library visits. You can do the guest speaking with that, or have them do the virtual library if you have access to those kind of things. You can do things like physical activities. These are somewhat limiting. Now, those of you in the sciences are probably thinking challenge-wise at this point, how can I possibly do labs? If we're pushed to this, how can we do lab science in the online? Can it be done? or can't it be done? What do you think?
You did it.
They did it.
It's not the same.
You're right. There's limitations to it. I'm not saying that. There is a company out there, and I am not stumping for them in any way, but there are things that I've seen people do. Yes, when they're in your chemistry lab or they're in your biology lab, you obviously have a lot more equipment, you have a lot more control, you have a lot of in-depth skills and things that you are getting them to do. There's a company out there called LabPack, and what they will do, they will put together, last I had looked, they were about $100 to $150. I think they've got, last I saw, they were like 20 different lab boxes. And what a student can do is purchase that lab box, and then they can open up and run the lab at home and do it under whatever parental supervision or whatever else if you wanted to do this synchronously, you could as well. It'd be a little more cumbersome, but it could be done. And I've seen it done, and I've talked to some faculty who have utilized these over the years. Yeah, they say there are some limitations. There's no question. That's obviously a lab would be something that would be better taught face-to-face. But this is an option if you're pushed into this, where you have students learning at a distance. I know there are several around the country, there are some online cyber charter schools that utilize this and utilize some of their own, or they put together things that the home has to go purchase and do, and they do the labs, and then they write up the report and send it in. So there are ways to do it, but yeah, I kind of agree. That's one of the things that I would probably say, yeah, it can be done online, but maybe it's better taught face-to-face. Okay, those are some of those things. The problem-based learning, the research papers, simulations, and role play, there's a number of games and activities out there on the internet that can be done through simulations. They get the students thinking, they get them seeing, they get them applications. There's a number of things that you can. How many of you remember the old Sims? Sims, there were a bunch of them that they came out with where you're actually doing all kinds of simulations, farming and building towns and doing that kind of thing. I think there's some more that are a little bit more academic in nature and a little more focused. There are some of those that are out there as well. Skip down, if you would, to the cooperative learning. I put together a whole list of things that we traditionally do for group work. Debates, case study, some redundancy to that, discussion boards, journal club, learner group presentations. How many of you use jigsaw methods in your classes? There are some instructions here, entry and exit tickets, just a variety of different group work and group things that you can do. And these talk about how you would structure. Here's what I would ask you to do. Now, we only have about 20 minutes left here. But what I would ask you to do is go back to your traditional versus your web-based design. And I want you to start thinking about what opportunities there are to transition from the traditional to the online opportunity, asynchronously or synchronously. Through this, the intro and welcome, I could probably do this through text-based. In other words, I would put a weekly focus and an intro. I could put a recording in other words, an audio recording of my voice that just explains what we're going to do and why. The warm-ups, I can post the puzzles that I would do. I can scan them. Or I can develop them in a PowerPoint and have them posted on my shell. The readings in the chapter, I can assign those and say, please read chapter 2 or read pages 113 to 118 in the book. A presentation, a PowerPoint that I would use, I can narrate. Example, this PowerPoint that I'm doing right now is actually being narrated because it's being recorded. I can also do this in PowerPoint directly. You can do a narrated PowerPoint, and I know there are people within your faculty that can show you how to do that. It's a very, very simple, easy thing to do. You can save those PowerPoints down. Your students can open them and listen to your lectures, and those lectures will run automatically. If I was going to do that, I could just do the narrated presentation. One of the things that I would tell you with narrated presentations is generally you probably want to keep them about 10 to 15 minutes. If you have to go greater than that for lecture, you may want to do several. A lot of the things that I do, they're probably about a half an hour, 40-minute long. I will break them up into either 2 or 3 different presentations, or I will have the students stop and go out and do something. It just breaks it up for students a little bit. The YouTube video, you can just load links to YouTube videos and have the students go out and watch those videos on their own and then come back and report on certain things. You can do the class discussion. Why was the Battle of Gettysburg significant? It might be something that I would spend a fair amount of time in discussion. That may be something that I put up as a classroom question in Google. The group work, break students up into groups of 4 and have them develop a report. Have them take that group or take one of the leaders in on the Battle of Gettysburg on either side, the North or the South, and it might have them develop a report on that. Or I could even have them develop a presentation on that, and where they could do it one of 2 ways. They could present synchronously like this, or they could do a narrated PowerPoint and present that way. There's a number of different things to do. It's a little more cumbersome, but it can be done. Exams and quizzes, those can be posted online. You can do that through Google Classroom. There's ways to do that. We'll talk about some of those here in a few minutes. So if you would, please take a couple of minutes and look at the transitions. My question is this: for those of you in the elementary grades, this lesson that I posted up before, Intro to Numbers, is there anything here that you see that you could do asynchronously? Where are the elementary teachers? K through 4 or 5? Are there any of these lessons that you could do asynchronously? Or would this be better? In fact, I'm looking at this and thinking what I posted up here is probably better, and I don't see any real way. Oh, I could post the story and I could post a couple other things and I could make a video of myself doing this. But that may not be the best way. The best way may be to do something like this in real time through a synchronous Google Meets. Do you agree? Do you disagree? What do you think?
It would be the best way to do it synchronously and like in the classroom, but when they're 6 years old, it's really hard to achieve that. They need their parents on the computer at the right time, and it's stressful for the parents.
Yep. This is where in the younger grades, like you're talking about, the 6-year-olds, the 7-year-olds, even the 8-year-olds, they probably require more face-to-face kind of interaction. And this is where you need parental involvement. If the students are locked at home, they're not as self-directed because they just don't know what to do. This is where parental involvement has to do, and now your interactions interact with the parents because they now become the assistants with this. So it does take more, and there's less asynchronous, I think, that works with the lower grades, simply because they're not self-directed enough to get on and do it. I know the middle school is probably a little better. High school may be a little better than that, but you still have motivational issues. Okay, so those are always the challenges with any kind of a K through 12 setting for moving to asynchronous. You have to know what will work and what won't. If I put all of this, yes, I could put this online asynchronously, but would the students get it? Would the students do it? Would they know what to do? Do they read well enough to know how to do it? Because a lot of this is text-based, so it's not going to function. So you need to be more synchronous in your approach to this. Okay, those are the important aspects of that. So let's take a minute real quickly, and if somebody wants to share, and maybe if we do 1 or 2, just with the time that we have, 1 or 2 of you that want to share some of the things that you have done, or some of the, in fact, let's just do this, just in the interest of time. I want you to take a particularly challenging pedagogy that you're not sure of. There's just something that you do in the face-to-face. Let's talk a little bit about how you transition that over. So if anybody has a pedagogy that you have a good idea, or you're not sure you have a good idea that you just want to share, let's see if we can discuss it, because I think that's how we're going to learn from each other. So please, somebody want to share one of your pedagogies and what you think and how you would like to transition that to the online. Please go ahead.
Well, I mean, the biggest challenge for me is labs, as we said before. And last spring when we went online, I didn't do as many as I would have. I really did very few, just because we didn't have a lot of time to.
Right.
A lot of techniques. But what I did end up doing was hard, because what I ended up doing was filming myself doing the lab, and then asking the students they had to read the handout and kind of just like try to imagine through the process. And then they did a full lab report, and they could utilize data that was given to them and kind of get the benefit of most of it. But it's certainly not what I would have liked to have done if I had a better option. And for some labs, it worked well.
Yeah, this is one of those things that, and you probably find that home lab takes far more time. Takes more time for you, takes more time for the students, and it's one of those things that is probably, in fact it is, it's not as efficient as they're coming to your lab. You know, what you can accomplish in a 45-minute period of time with students sitting in front of you versus what can be done asynchronously, it's a lot of coordination on your part, and probably I would say it was probably tenfold work for probably half production. But this is what you get forced into with this. Now, it can be done, but this is one of those things that I would say probably is better done face-to-face if you can do it. Now, being forced into this, you know, that's a whole different dynamic with that. Okay, but I think what you're approaching and what you're doing is probably the best that you can do. And you probably also realize just how much production goes into this in transitioning that to the online. It's more.
Made me pick and choose carefully, because, you know, you can't do as many.
Right. So you prioritize and what is best going to meet your objectives, and at the same point, not fall too far back. Yeah, that is a challenge. I don't disagree with you on that. But it sounds like you have some interesting ways to approach it that will work. In all honesty, and this goes to the college professor in me, it sounds like there's a paper in there that you could very easily write up as to what you did and what worked and what the challenges and barriers were to that. So that'd be something that would be very, very interesting, I think. Yeah, in your spare time, I know. Yeah, I know. What other pedagogies, what other ideas do you have and how you could transition those? How many of you are doing group work in anything? How many of in your lessons that you had some kind of cooperative learning lesson or a group work lesson that you would do? You want to share how you would transition that to the online?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Well, this past quarter, I had students do a research on a Holocaust hero, and they would have normally done it in the classroom. Right, that's how I envisioned it. But instead, I had them do it together on Google Slides. And they worked in, a few of them worked in groups. I gave them the option of doing it individually or in groups, and a bunch of them did it in groups, and it worked really well. So together, they put the slideshow together and did all the annotating, and then posted that on Google Classroom so that I could then see it and allow the students to also do that after it was done. It did work well.
Yeah, that sounds very, very similar to what the example I was doing in that leadership class I was doing, where they did it at did it work? Do you think they got as much out of it?
I think they did. They did a really great job.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I find interesting is when you think, well, you know, they're kind of out of my sight, they're doing their own thing. But the surprising thing is they go into a great depth, and there's a certain accountability that does come into place when you do a cooperative learning group, when you do a team approach to that. They will sometimes surprise you, and it shows that you can do it. Now, I don't know, like I said, I don't know Google Classrooms as well as I know some of the other LMSs out there, but I think you can structure and do some, establish some group pages or establish some different things. Am I wrong with that? You can set up some group pages if you would. We can do that in Blackboard, where I can give them access to certain things. The other thing you can give them access to outside of your site is kind of a Google Classroom, a Google Meets, where they can get together and do their planning and do their production and do their work. It's, again, takes a little coordination on your part, but it is quite doable. Okay, it is quite doable. Again, a lot of this is production. Okay, it's production on your part. It's a lot of additional extra work on your part to figure out how to transition it. And initially, the workload gets a little high up front. But after you've done it the first time, it's kind of like, think of your first year of teaching. I remember my first year of teaching was a nightmare because I was writing curriculum. The second year, it was a little bit easier because I had everything there. And the third year, it became almost rote. So if you find this, and my sense is that we're all going back to the normal at some point, but I think what you're going to find over the course of this next period of time, what you've already used, from March through today, is you found different pedagogies, you found different opportunities, and some of you may have found some things that you think work better that you can continue to utilize asynchronously once you go back, and we all go back to whatever normal means. I'm not even sure what that means. So those are some different things. All right, we've talked about this, gone through this. I want to talk a couple of minutes, and Leslie, how much time do we have? Because I know you guys are on a schedule.
How much? I'd say 5 to 10 would be great. If
I
we
think
could
I
wrap
could-
it up in 5.
I think I can wrap this up in the next 5 to 10 minutes. I think we
Okay.
can do that. There is always question, and on the handout that I gave you, that 4 or 5 page handout, I apologize for the size, but you have it electronically. You can make it bigger to watch and to see. But there is always the question of, can I test online? Can I evaluate? Can I assess online? And the answer is yes. But there are challenges with that, especially if you are utilizing and working with, test security and worried about cheating and things like that. Those are challenges. Within any kind of an assessment format, we have summative and formative assessment. I'm not going to spend time talking about that because you all know what those are. The summative assessment we do through exams, projects, assignments, things like that. They come at the end. They tell us, whether we met our objectives or not, whether the students learned the objectives. The labs that you do, you're using that. That's a project kind of thing. In other subject areas in English, maybe it's a term paper. Maybe it's just a smaller paper. Maybe it's a report of some kind. It's just a whole bunch of different things that pull together what the student learned and knew during that period of time. So the question is, can I put those things and do those things online? Yes, you can. Those are easy. The projects, which we were kind of talking about, the group projects, the lab projects, and anything else that you're all pulling together, yes, they can be done online. The K through 4 or 5, yeah, you have additional challenges there because you want those students in front of you. But can I do exams online? And the answer is yes, and there's some different things that you can do. There's different products out there that can be utilized to establish testing. There's something called, and I'm not selling these are just things that I'm aware of. There's Respondus lockdown browser. There's monitoring where you can have a student take the exam electronically, and then you can monitor it synchronously. So that you can do it that way. You could have the students take an exam at any point in time. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, within Google Classrooms, I know this is capable in Blackboard, but you can set up different parameters with an online posted exam where they only have a certain period of time to take it, and they only can take it during, so that you could set up an exam to go for 45 minutes from 11 to 11:45 on September 3rd. Okay, you can do something like that and limit the amount of time, and then after that period of time, the test goes away. So there are some test things that you can do. There's also some things to ask, are there some alternatives that I can do? Now, how many of you remember when you were in high school or college, more probably college, you had the old take-home exam? I always hated those because those were not just rote memorization and spit back out the information. This was now higher order thinking where you were looking for the student to analyze, synthesize, and evaluate something along Bloom's taxonomy and get them to apply it. So a take-home exam allows the idea that they're going to use the materials that you've given, they're going to use the book, they're going to use other things, but your questions are such that they are higher order thinking. So you could consider doing those kind of things where those are alternative type of test things. If your testing, however, requires more multiple choice type questions or more objective type questions, You can utilize the time elements. You can also utilize certain levels of monitoring where the student is seeing what's going on. In other words, where you can see the student take the test or take the exam right in front of you. There are ways to do that, but they're also on their computer if you're having, especially if you're having a test that is applied online. You can have them take it electronically. And that's where you come down with the lockdown browsers that don't allow them to go out and search things, and you can monitor them electronically and see them, even though there are still some ways that students will get around that and cheat if they're so inclined. We see that all the time in higher education. But it is an alternative, and there are different ways to think. The questions I would tell you to ask yourself is, are there alternatives to the forms of testing that you do, and are there different ways of what you want to test and what you want to evaluate? Can you do it with projects? Can you do it with more open-ended analysis, synthesis, evaluation type questions that don't just require rote memorization and regurgitation of information? Those are questions you have to ask and know that fit into your particular areas. Formative evaluation. Formative evaluation happens during the formation of all learning. That's what you are doing. It's one of the things that I'm doing with you, or trying to find out to make sure that I'm meeting your needs. I'm looking for your interactions with me, with each other. I listen to, through questions and observations, what's going on. In the face-to-face setting or even a synchronous setting, we get a certain sense of that by reading people's body language, questions, observing, those kind of things. In the online, I might tell you, I think sometimes the formative evaluation takes on a deeper meaning for me. Because most of what I'm seeing formatively is through discussion boards, through emails, through assignments that I'm doing. I get a deeper sense of whether the student is learning something because I now have what I call an archival record. I can see everything. And now I can know and more deeply understand individual students' growth. In a face-to-face class, sometimes, I look for the head nods, I look for the facial expressions, the body language, but I don't truly know and understand what that student knows and understands. However, when I see things through archival records, sometimes I can see a little deeper. Okay. All right. Questions about the assessment. And we could spend, in all honesty, an entire 3-credit graduate course on online assessment. In fact, we do. That's one of the things that we built a few years ago, was an online assessment. But does anybody have any questions at this point that I could potentially answer or talk about, or things that you really want to know a little bit more about that I may be able to cover, not maybe today, but maybe tomorrow? Think about those, and we can maybe address some of those in some level of a Q&A tomorrow. All right, last thing I want to talk about is some things to think about as you go through and start to develop and begin the new school year, some different things for interaction. Tomorrow, one of the things that we're going to talk about is how you create interaction. But interaction for you folks takes on a whole different dynamic than it does for higher education, because you're not just interacting with your students, you're interacting with the community at this point. And your community is not only your students, it's also your parents, because they're now partners in this learning process with us. Okay, so we have to integrate them. So some things to think about as you go through. Start of the school year needs to focus on community building and digital competency. In other words, making sure that all of your students are ready, that they're all ready to walk and go with this. Your communications with parents need to become a priority. And I would probably argue or suggest that at the lower grade levels, that this becomes even more paramount. I think you need to establish a consistent location, predictable schedule for sharing information. You need to set, and this is key, you know this in face-to-face, you do this in your face-to-face, it's exacerbated in the online, especially synchronous, even more so asynchronous. You need to set clear expectations and boundaries for what you want not only students to do, but also your expectations for communications. I would tell you to create a backup plan for off hours and tech support. And that's something that's going to have to come through Leslie and through how you're going to deal with all of that through your administration. But technology support is going to be an issue. And I know it's probably more of an issue in higher education. It's kind of easy. We have a help desk. I don't know that you have those formats, but you have to come up with consistent ways. I would probably argue, and I'm kind of impressed with the fact that you have all grouped each other. You need team collaboration. I think this is paramount. How you define your teams, whether it's by grade, by subject, by discipline, that's up to you. But I would tell you, you need to start sharing amongst each other different pedagogies and different things that you're finding that work. And I would probably argue that what the sciences know could be shared with English, and what English knows could be shared with science. Now, but I think the cross platforms are good because you brainstorm different ideas. No, maybe what is done in the sciences doesn't work in English, but the English starts to understand how sciences have done certain things, and it's just an example. And now you can brainstorm and apply different techniques. Face-to-face time should be used for active learning, whether it's synchronous, whether it's face-to-face. It needs to explain and provide the level of clarity that is going to be incorporated for online. I think when you move to the online to the synchronous, and I hate to say this, but content needs to be simplified and maybe in some cases slowed down. That becomes a challenge, especially when we are charged with covering so much information in a short period of time. But just because you go faster to keep up doesn't mean students learn and process. So that becomes a challenge, and that is part of the downside of being forced into what we're doing right now. Clarity of instruction needs to be accentuated. Don't assume because you're saying something that the students understand it. Navigation through your LMS, through Google Classrooms needs to be clear. And here's what I will tell you. If it's clear to you, it will probably be clear to your students. But even so, you have to be open to them not understanding what you're talking about, and that you need to provide additional clarity of instruction, even if it's just repeating it. That's that. Feedback needs to be focused on needs to be the focus of assessment. In other words, providing formative assessed informative feedback more so than summative evaluation at this point. The summative assessment, I think one of those things that we talked about before needs to maybe be rethought a little bit. Just to make sure that it's meeting everybody's needs and meeting the students' needs at that point. So, comments or questions? We've covered really an awful lot of information in the last 2 hours. I hope this has been of some value to you, but I am open for whatever questions that you may have at this point, and I'll stay on as long as you need to.
Rick, I think it was really helpful to think about which of those 4 categories our lesson falls into, and based on that to know, so is that better met synchronously, asynchronously? I think more thought into what we were into the best way to meet those was a really helpful focus for how we choose our strategies. We figured out strategies. I don't know
Sure.
that we did it with as much purpose as we did, well, I haven't seen them online in a couple of days, so I should probably have an online class. Thinking more about which classes should be online is probably, or be synchronous is probably the most helpful piece, like really putting some method behind what do I want to accomplish and how do I do that one the best. That was really helpful.
I think, and I think you're absolutely correct. Everybody back in March was pushed very quickly into this, and most went unprepared. You're not alone. I think most did the very best that they could with what they had, and it was just forced. Now maybe there's an opportunity moving forward to think with more purpose about where you want to go, what you want to do, what's best taught which way, if you have those opportunities. It's just that challenge of, as I said earlier, thinking digitally with us, thinking what can be done and what might be better done online, what might be better done face-to-face, what might be better done synchronously, asynchronously. You now have opportunities, and I think you need to see it this way. And this is one of the things that we've tried to help the rest of our faculty at Robert Morris understand, you know, it's not just being forced into something. There are certain things, there are certain opportunities that present themselves for better learning. It's just, it's pushing people to learn new and different ways of doing things. So, okay, I thank you all. Or anybody else have any other questions or comments? If not, I'm going to stop the recording and say thank you to you all. And hold on a second.